My name is Brian, I'm a recovered alcoholic. Welcome to the Big Book Experience Workshop. My sobriety date is February 2nd, 1997. For that, I'm very grateful. This is something that you experience. That's why I like Big Book Experience Workshop, because I feel like as we're going through, I've been sharing my experiences. And hopefully, as we've gone through this, I've been able to break down each step. And I hope that you've been able to have an experience as well. We're coming off from last week. And last week, we learned about the 7-step prayer and how to use that every day, how to use that more than every day, how to use that like a lot, because we learned in the 7-step that it's a defect removal prayer. So every time I become aware of a defect, every time I become aware of it, aware of I'm doing something, I want to go to my higher power. I want to go to God, and I want to do the prayer. I pray that you now remove from me this defect of character that stands in my way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out here to do your bidding. Amen. And I use that prayer constantly, all the time, because we're starting to become aware. I mean, think about what we started in 6 and 7, what we're bringing in. We came out of step 4. We came out of step 4 with more assets than we did liabilities, because we are more good than we are bad. You think about that. If I'm trying to learn from my mistakes, then that makes me more good than I am bad. That doesn't mean I'm not going to make mistakes. But what it does mean is, like Sean mentioned earlier before we started recording, that we learn. We learn from our mistakes, whether they're bad or good. We always learning from, always learn, And so I got assets and I got liabilities, and I always want to have, I always want to be living more in my assets than I will in my liabilities. That's when I start living a better life. So we're showing you actually how to use this step 7 prayer, how it's going to actually work in step 10 when we get there. But it's already given us instructions of what to do, because we're coming into step 7 with a whole bunch of defects. Now we're asking God to remove them. And now we have to pretend as if God removed them all. And I asked everyone to be on we talked about acting all the time. We learned all about acting in step 3, being an actor, having stage characters, all that type of stuff. We learned all about the ego, how the ego is just behind all those characters. The ego is behind it all. I like to say the ego is cunning, baffling, and powerful. And without help is too much for us, It says, now we need more action. Taking out my pen. I'm even going to underline that word. We need more action. I thought up to this point that I had already done enough action with step 4. I don't know about any of you, but that is how I felt. I felt like I've really done enough. I've done a lot of work up there. I've written an awful lot. Me personally, I think I had about 300 pages or something. I don't even know. But now it's telling me, now we need more action. I've already been doing a lot of action this last week. I gave out that assignment about us, acting like a good Samaritan every day. So we go out for the whole week and we'll act on our best behavior and see how that went for a week. And after this done, I'm going to have everybody let me know how that went. I know for me, that went really well. Even when there was times where I was like starting to feel myself feel impatient when I'm in line somewhere. Oh, I can't stand waiting. And that's a perfect time for me to go, all right, take this away. Be more patient, right? We start to change. But we need more action, without which we find that faith without works is dead. Faith without works is dead. It says, let's look at steps 8 and 9. But first, before we look at 9, because 9 we're going to go into detail, we're going to look at step 8. The next line says, we have a list of all persons we have harmed and to whom we are willing to make amends. It said we made it when we took inventory. So that's why we go all the way back when we first did resentments. At the bottom of that resentment, at the bottom of, I think we had it in the bottom of that third column, we wrote harms. Was there any other harms? We talked about collateral damage, and we list our harms. We did the same thing in the sex conduct. Who did we harm? That was the second question. So we have a list of all the people that we have harmed. Now, if you don't, at this point, if you don't, or you're starting to think, is there other people on the list that maybe wasn't on the list in step 4? Because it's really important that this list has to be complete. Because you remember in step 4 where it says half measures avail us nothing. It said, so now we're going to get into this. Oh, yeah, I want to go back here. It says, we have a list of all persons we had harmed and to whom we're willing to make amends. If we just go back a few pages, back to page 70, and it's like third line from the bottom, it says, we have a list. We have listed the people we have hurt or harmed by our conduct and are willing to set these matters, are willing to straighten out the past if we can. You see, we're already willing here, back in step 4. I already have a list of people I hurt by my conduct who have harmed, and I'm willing to straighten out the past if I can. It's reminding me of that again. We have a list of all persons we had harmed and to whom we are willing to make amends. It says we made it when we took inventory. We subjected ourselves to a drastic. I underlined the word drastic because I really thought that was pretty drastic. Self-appraisal, man. When we were doing that inventory, I thought, oh man, well, especially when we dove into the ego and stuff and resentments, I thought, man, this is really drastic, right? Now, it says, now we go out to our fellows and repair the damage done in the past. And I just wrote in the margin, from living with my ego. I think of all that damage I had done had come from living with my ego, and I never even knew it. I never even knew it. So many things have been revealed to me in this process. Lots of things that I just didn't even know. I never knew that I was living. My ego was ruling everything from behind at all. To me, the ego is like the guy in the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. It's the ego. It's the last thing you'd ever suspect, right? It says, we attempt to sweep away the debris which is accumulated out of our effort to live on self-will. Well, we also learned that behind self-will, selfish self-centeredness, behind all of that is the ego, right? To live life on self-will and run the show ourselves. It sounds familiar. This sort of run effort to live on self-will and run the show ourselves. And what it brings up to me is page 60. So again, I went to 70. Now we're going to go to 60. It's taking a step back here. Live on self-will, run the show ourselves. 3 lines from the bottom, again, 3 lines from the bottom of page 60, it says, he is like the actor who wants to run the whole show. See, it's referring back to living on self-will. It's referring back to page 60. All right. We attempt. That means some kind of action, right? To sweep away the debris, which is accumulated out of our effort to live life on self-will and run the show ourselves. We're going to try to clean up my side of the street, right? Attempt to sweep away the debris. I'm only there to clear up my side of the street. I like to think of it as like I grew up in New England, and I grew up in a state called Connecticut. And it would snow. We'd get a lot of snow in the winter. And when I moved, I lived in the city, and and I rented a house. But my responsibility was to keep I had to shovel my sidewalk that was right in front of my house. It was only like maybe 20 feet, but that was my responsibility. And so I remember going out there and shoveling it, and sometimes I might go a little bit further down to help out the other guys, but they were responsible for their areas. You see, and I was looking at it as a way like an amends. I'm there to clear up my side. I want my side of the street to be all cleaned up, you know. It says we sweep away the debris which is accumulated out of our effort to live life. There's debris all over the place, all over my past. I'm going to go back in there and clean that up. Now it says, if we haven't the will to do this, now it's given me the 8-step prayer. It says we ask. And every time I said we ask, again, even back up the top of the page of step 6, the last line, we ask God, it's always referring to prayer. We ask until it comes. So what are we going to ask? We're going to sit and do a prayer and ask for prayer of willingness. It's the second half of step 8. The first half is having the list. Well, we already have the list coming out of step 4. And then it says to whom we are willing to make amends. It's almost like I feel like a theme going through all these steps is like willingness, It's all over the place. So I guess that, the 8-step prayer, would be God, God, higher power, give me the willingness to make amends to everyone on my list. I know like Joe and Charlie, they make up, they make a list and it'll be like three lists. They make, uh, they got the willings and then they got the maybes and then they got the unwillings, now, um, I always like to start off with when I make amends is like the big ones, and so, you know, um, for me, a big one for me was going to my mom, who I'd stole money from, and just I needed to make amends to my mom, and my mom gave me up when I was 12 years old, and here I was, you know, 28 years old, when it's 16 years later, and I got to make amends to my mom, and I'm angry at my mom for giving me up. But I go to her and I make amends for my side of the street. I saw where I was wrong in my inventory, you know, and 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 I made amends. And I'm not going to get too much into 9, but when I cleaned my side of the street, you know, there was lots of things I always wanted to hear from her, and I never did. And when I made amends to her, she had said all those things that I always wanted to hear. And all of a sudden we had a relationship, and everything was, I just made it right by humbling myself and making amends, you know. But I had to ask God for help, for the willingness to do that to begin with, because I didn't want to. I was afraid. What if she rejects? Right? We can spend all this time up here thinking, but I like to think that if I go up here and I'm not with God, man, it's going to be all messed up. I'm going to go back to living life on self will, running the show myself. So I'm going to ask an 8-step prayer. So we've already been instructed here to reflect back on page 70, with making the list, being willing to make amends. Um, I talked a little bit about step 4, right? The repair the damage done in the past. That's what I did with my mom. I repaired the damage done in the past. That's what we're trying to do. Repair the damage done. Clean up the debris that I've left. And then I learned that there's an 8-step prayer. I gotta humble myself and ask for the willingness. Now, everyone's going to have, before we actually, get a chance to dive into amends, that's going to be, I'm not going to do step 9 this week. I'm going to do that next week. But everyone's going to have a week to kind of sit on step 8 for a second. And I want everyone to make sure that this list is 100% complete. Because I know for me, sometime when I had a chance to sit with it, I was like, oh yeah, wait a minute. I owe somebody some money, and I start to think about it and I'm like, wait. And then I start to add, I go into meditation, you know, And then I start to write like, hey, God, if I left anything out, what do I need? Kind of like that same prayer we did in step 5. And I almost always come up with at least a couple things that I didn't know I had before. So everybody's got some time to work on that list, you know. I'm going to go to the next line. It's really, really important. That's why it's squiggly writing. And I'm like, what are they? Remember, it was agreed at the beginning we would go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. And it's all, well, beginning. You see what's in squiggly writing? My book says beginning, we would go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. That whole line is squiggly writing. And I make you a bet. It's squiggly writing in everybody else's book too. And what I was taught, when you see that squiggly writing, it's really important. So what are they referencing? We've seen so far going down into this paragraph that they keep referencing different things and having us go back, right? It's almost like a review, but not quite in order. And so it says it was remembered, it was agreed at the beginning. The beginning of what? What are they talking about? The beginning. I don't remember ever saying I'm willing to go to any length in the doctor's opinion or the prefaces or any of that. I don't remember ever being asked, am I willing, to go to any length, even in step 2, or step 1, or step 2. And so anyway, it says, remembered, it was agreed in the beginning of this process that it's the process, we start this process that we're going to have an experience. Remember, we're digging down deep into the unconscious and we're pulling stuff out, that we've done while we were unconscious for decades. Now we're doing inventory of that, right? It was agreed in the beginning that we would go to any length for victory over alcohol. I want everyone to turn to page 58. Page 58, in the middle of the page, everybody sees where it says our stories disclosed in a journal way, what we used to be like, what happened, what we are like now. Okay, it says right here, if this is the first decision that we had to make in step 3, this is our very first decision, and we couldn't move forward until the decision was made. So here's the first decision. If you have decided you want what we have, well, what is it that we have? Well, what we have to offer is only one solution, and it's a spiritual solution. So do you want what we have? A spiritual solution to your problems that will solve what? Spiritual principles will solve all my problems. So it's not just a spiritual solution to one problem, it says all, right? So have you decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it? Huh. I kind of feel like that dash could have been a question mark, right? Because it's asking you, do you want what we have? And are you willing to go to any length to get it? And then it says, yes, I say yes. And then you are ready to take certain steps. Now, I showed you where it was to go to any length, but where's the beginning? Well, let's keep going down. At some of these, we bulked. You know what that means to bulk? Kind of like stop, pause, and go, wait a minute. I don't know, right? Not quite the pause that we were talking about before, right? We thought we could find an easier, softer way. Wait a minute, you're talking about all this writing and all this inventory and going into the unconscious. Whoa, maybe there's an easier, softer way. But then it says, but we could not. It says, with all the earnestness at our command, we beg you. Now, I haven't seen that word beg since step 2, which wasn't that further back, just a couple of pages, right? It says, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. So this is the very start, is right here in step 3 on page 59. It says it right there from the very start. And not only do I got to be fearless and thorough, but I got to be willing to go to any length to get what you guys got. You see, I got to be willing to go to any length. Go back to page 76 again. Remember, it was agreed at the beginning on page 58 at step 3, the beginning of this process, that we would go to any length for victory over alcohol. The beginning of this process. I'm going to any length. What does it mean to go to any length? Huh. It's huge. It's squiggly writing. You know what it means? I don't know. You know what it means to me to go to any lengths? I start to think of the lengths that I went to when I was drinking. I remember my sponsor said to me, he gave me all the information to step 4. We were at a meeting. We were finishing up the meeting, and I was getting ready to go home, and he gave me the information for step 4. We started a couple, so I know how to do resentments. I knew how to do fears. I knew how to do my conduct, my sex conduct. And he came out and he asked me, gave me all the information, and then he said, have you ever stayed up all night drinking? I said, the ego likes to kick in when we tell these war stories. So I said, you know what? I probably have stayed up for a whole week, probably at least 5 days, you know, pure insanity, right? Um, Drinking energy drinks and yeah. Anyway, so he said, okay, then you're going to stay up all night and get this done. Are you still willing to go to any lengths? What lengths are you willing to go? Guess what? I was like, man, I ain't willing to give up my sleep. I got to work at 6 a.m. I was in the military. I worked 12-hour days. Don't you know my sleep? You know, what's more important, sleeping or being free? I wanted to cry because being free, I want to be free so bad that I was willing to give up my sleep. And I sat there and I just wrote and wrote until my hand was cramped up and I couldn't write and write. I couldn't. I remember one time I was trying to write with the left hand. That was horrible. Anyway, the next day he came to pick me up and he said, did you have that work done? Because we're doing step 5. And I didn't want to say no. And I had the work done. The very next day we did step 5. I want to tell you, I was sober 3 days, 3 days. And I wrote a lot, 3 days. Something happened. What lengths are you willing to go? Go to any lengths. What does that mean to you to go to any lengths for victory over alcohol? What does it mean to go to any lengths? I always like to look back to the lengths that I went to when I was drinking. And I got to be fearless and thorough. The next line says, probably there are still some misgivings. As we look over the list, it's not saying we're still looking over the list. I will experience the miracle we talked about in step 6 and 7 in the actions that I'm going to do in step 9. I'm going to experience the miracle of 6 and 7 in the actions I do in 9. I'm going to go through my entire list. And I'm going to pause at each name. And I'm going to ask, am I willing to do whatever each person or institution asks to right this wrong? Am I willing to do whatever each person or institution asks to right this wrong? Again, what lengths are you willing to go? I get the power to do the ones I'm not willing to do from doing the ones I'm willing to do first. Again, I started with the big one with my mom. I had a lot of fear. I don't even know what that fear. It was just, I just do it up in my own mind. It wasn't even. My mom loves me, and I was afraid she wasn't going to accept me. I just created all this stuff in my own brain. What if she didn't accept it? And of course she was gonna. She's my mom, But I drew up all this stuff in my mind. You see how we just real imagine. We can create all this stuff in our minds. The other thing I want to say here is we're getting ready to do we're doing step 9 prep, and I really want to make this a point that I'm going to actually make it again next week too. Apology is a polite gesture for something that doesn't imply admission of guilt or regret, but only a desire to clear the grounds for some reason. So I'm going to give you something like, what's so common is I go to a meeting, I'm at the coffee area, I'm getting a cup of coffee, and somebody bumps me, or I bump them. Let's go that way. I bump them and I spill their coffee, and I'm going to say, I'm sorry. It's an apology. I'm sorry for spilling your coffee. Let me help you clean it up. And I get the paper towels and I clean it up. You see? And I'm not spending any time thinking about it. And there's no harm. Everything's good. He gets another cup of coffee. Everything's fine, right? So apologies for something I did on accident. On accident. You know, I hit somebody in traffic. They're at a stop sign, right? They're at a stoplight, and I come up and I bump them. What's the first thing you do? You get out of your car, you exchange. I always say, I'm sorry, right? I didn't mean to do that. But an amends is something different. An amends is to formally compensate others for the harm I caused them on purpose with a sincere desire to correct my behavior of the past for the future to make right my wrongs. See, there's a lot in there. To make amends when it means to correct, to change. I think of an amend, it would be like making an amendment to court documents. It means to change something. So for me to make an amend is I'm going to mend my behavior. And that's what I'm talking about when I make amends to somebody. What am I going to do? Right? Formally compensate others for the harm I caused them with a sincere desire to correct my behavior for the past and for the future to make right my wrongs. I only apologize when I do something by accident. Everything else, I got to make amends. Make amends. So I was this is how I was taught. I was taught to get one of these cards here. These are 3x5 cards. I don't know if you guys can get these in the UK or not, but I take one of these. I got a whole stack of them here. I probably have maybe 300 here. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a 3x5 card, and I take the person's name, and I'm just going to put it right on the top. And then the next lines, a couple lines down, I'm going to write from my inventory the harm that I have done them. And that's what I'm going to read it right to them. That's my harm. And then I'm going to ask them underneath that, I'm going to ask, is there any harm that I'm aware of? So I'm going to set up this 3x5 card. It's important to make that list. So I got that list. Let's say I got a list of 15 people that I've harmed. You're going to have 15 different cards because you're going to take this card with you when you actually go in and make an amends, and you're going to read from the card. It's just that simple, you know? And so I'm going to tell you some things that I put on the card to make it all right. Again, we're doing the prep work for step 9, you know? Again, I'm going to put the name at the top of the page, and I'm going to write down specific harm from my inventory that I had done to them. I'm going to write out in prayer. I always take everything to prayer, you know? So I'm going to write out in prayer what I'm going to say. I'm going to look at my inventory. And I'm also going to write on there if I'm willing or not. If I'm willing, I'm going to write a plus. If I'm not willing, I'm going to put it negative. You see, and I start to do the ones that got pluses first. What I'm going to write on the card is my actual harm done to the person, right? By write the person's name, the actual harm. The nature of the intended amend. Well, I changed my behavior. I want to change, right? How is best to phrase your amends from your inventory? That's why it's important to have a sponsor that it's got experience with making amends to help us get these cards all set up, right? What's the best way to make your amends? And I'm going to say the best way to make any amends is direct, face to face, especially if you've harmed somebody face to face. If I've harmed you face to face, I got to make amends to you face to face. No, somebody's got their microphone on. Can somebody mute that? I'd like to really get into this, a bit more. By this time, he has begun to undergo a dramatic experience that is resulting in the change of mind and heart from what we've been doing, steps 1 through 7. Remember our definition of insanity. Having completed the actions in the first 7 steps, the alcoholic has commenced to experience conscious contact with right thinking, with sanity. Remember right thinking. Remember I said you got to go out for the week? an act, right? A good Samaritan. He has begun to feel at one with all. Feeling at one, he no longer feels like he's in a million pieces. I kind of felt like that million pieces when I was doing step 5. This list becomes virtually important as it is vitally important as it will be necessary element in the upcoming action that is necessary for the alcoholic to experience oneness with the power of God, with his fellow human beings, and with all things in the world and in the universe. You see, the alcoholic has an ego that has 3 motives. It wants first to separate the alcoholic from knowing the truth and to allow the alcoholic ego to think it is God. Next, the ego wants to separate him from knowing his true self. Finally, the ego wants to separate him from all other things. That is its sole function, to convince the alcoholic of its uniqueness. Remember how we felt so unique, but I'm different, right? If it can be accomplished, its mission, if it can accomplish its mission, the alcoholic ego will create so much disease within the alcoholic that he will be driven to drink again, regardless of circumstances or consequences. It is at this time, that the prodigy sits down with pen and paper and begins to expand his list of people and institutions that he has wronged in his lifetime. He also expands his study of the principles, the rules, the laws that he has resented and has violated. He will attempt to recall any harm that he has ever put out into the universe so he can try to right that harm and thereby beginning the process of experiencing oneness with all things. When I first experienced that oneness with my higher power, now it's telling me I can experience that with all things. Thus, he makes a list and he checks it twice, or 3 times, or a dozen times or more. You got all week now to check that list, to be certain that it contains all harms done. For the amends making must be thorough and complete if the drunk's recovery is to be thorough and complete. Well, that's some heavy stuff there about that ego. You need to make sure it's complete. The more in-depth knowledge we have of ourselves and our relationships to people, the more we see how we were involved, the more we will be willing to make amends to those people. If we don't see those things, usually we make hollow amends or don't get into it enough to benefit from it. If we can see the detail of harms we have done, we're more likely to make sincere and beneficial amends and clear those things up. This is why we were asked to make a list while we were making our inventory. It's easier to make the list while we are making a detailed inventory in step 4 than it is to wait until we get to step 8. If you wait, you won't have all the behind the scenes information you need to understand the whole thing. Or you won't even have that information that we need to make amends. So the first part of step 8 should be completed when you have done the inventory. The second part of this step says, become willing to make amends to them all. We must become willing to do this. And if we are not willing, we pray for the willingness until it comes. So I'm going to do the ones that I already have the willingness for, and I'm going to pray for the willingness for the ones that I don't. We say this, that each step has a prayer, and this is the 8-step prayer, willingness. Here, as in the rest of the steps, is the key. When we become willing, we often experience relief, even before we get a chance to make amends. The willingness is what frees us. Even if making the amends we need to make would inquire someone, we can't actually make them. When we become willing, we are freed from the guilt and the remorse that have kept us back. We have to be sure and get this point across. We are doing this for ourselves, not for the benefit it may bring to the person we are making amends to. We are trying to remove the things that block us from God. We take these steps for our own recovery. We are not considering what they may do for others. This is not our purpose. Once we get the list and become willing to make amends, then we can go into step 9, which continues this process. You know, again, I hope everyone had a deeper experience with this. I'm going to share with you a step 8 prayer. Father, please allow me to identify those I have harmed, to make an honest appraisal of the harm done and of the amend that is necessary. Father, give me the willingness to make all these amends. Amen. I always like having deeper experiences. I like taking questions in consideration, taking questions into consideration into meditation. I had to get that right. The two words didn't quite. Take them into meditation. Consider them. I did that for step 6 and 7. I'm going to do this again. The first one's going to be, have I made a list of all persons and institutions I have harmed? Is the list complete? Is it complete? If it's not complete, I want you to complete it by next week. If you haven't made a list, who and what in my life have been the most harm physically, financially, emotionally, intellectually, or spiritually by my behavior or by me not taking any action? Again, you got to look, you got to have done inventory to be able to do this. If you don't have an inventory to go off of, it's kind of hard. The next one, am I clear on the harm from my inventory and the necessary amends? If you're not clear, get with your sponsor. Am I willing to make appropriate amends? Am I willing? Again, you put on the card, is there any other harm that I'm aware of? You know, am I willing to make that appropriate amends of what they, what they say to me that it's got to make it right? Am I willing to do what they tell me to do to make it right? And the last one is, have I discussed these harms from my inventory and intended actions with step 9 with my sponsor? I was trying to think of a time where I made amends and I didn't talk to my sponsor. I was trying to think of, so, all right, I'll give you a couple. I'm always good at coming up with some juicy ones, right? So I remember I was thinking of a time where, I've been in recovery a long time, and you know, I've had a few girlfriends. And so I got this great idea. I'm gonna make amends with this ex-girlfriend. You know, it was a great idea. I'm writing out this amends and I'm gonna make this right. Plus, I got this motive, like, I think she's still single, right? You see, that's why it's important to like talk to your sponsor about this, because I tried to go and make amends to her, and then I was trying to get with her, and guess what? I just made more of a mess than I have to clean it up. Y- you know, uh, I just made more of a mess. I remember my sponsor said, "Why didn't you talk to me about that?" And I thought, man, if I just talked to him, I would have saved myself all kinds of grief. Always talk to your sponsor. What are you going to say? What are you going to do? Put it on the card, right? In the front of the card. Back of the card should be blank, because the back of the card is what you're going to do in the future. What are you going to do in the future? I'm not going to, I'm changing my behavior, and I'm not going to go around and do whatever I did to people anymore. It's about change. Change. Again, look it through the entire list. Asking in prayer. Take it into meditation. Take your list into meditation. Say a prayer for each one. Am I willing? Am I not willing? Again, you get the power. You're going to get the power to make amends to the ones that you are not willing to, from making the amends that you are, from the experience of making the amends that you are willing to. From that experience, it's going to give you, that's going to change you from going unwilling to willing. Again, it was agreed in the beginning, all the way back from page 58, that we would go to any length to have spiritual solution. I keep pushing prayer, meditation. That ego cannot survive. It's all up to my spiritual life that I'm living, whether the ego is going to come back. The more spiritual fit, I'm doing these spiritual things I have to do every day, spiritual conditioning, so I can get to a place. You know, I want to go a little bit further in the book here. Um, I'm on 76. I'm going to go down a little further. It says, I just look over the list of business acquaintances and friends we have hurt. We may feel diffident. Again, we're only thinking about making amends. Diffident. What does the word diffident means? Hesitant or shy. So I'm really going to feel really shy. I am. It says we feel really diffident about going to them on a spiritual basis, where I'm going to feel really shy anyway, because I feel like, spiritual basis. I'm just trying to figure this thing out. So I'm really not on, self-confident ground to really even talk about spiritual. So of course I'm going to feel diffident about that. Let us be reassured, to some people we need not and probably should not emphasize the spiritual feature on our first approach. We might prejudice them. I want you to think about when Ebby came to Bill. And the first thing Ebby says, I've got religion. And then Bill was like, oh, gosh, my liquor's going to last longer than your preaching, right? But immediately, as soon as he said that, Bill started going into prejudice and started talking about his experiences, right? But here's the thing. At the moment, we are trying to put our lives in order. Because right now, my life is a mess, and I got to put it in order. And it starts with taking what's in the brain here and putting it on paper and organizing all my thoughts, right? And all my resentments and my fears and getting all that. Man, that felt good. I felt like I got some kind of order going. And then I did step 5, and I just felt a little bit freer up here. And now I'm starting to get my life in order. At the moment, we are trying to put our lives in order. Everything's starting to fit in place now. But that is not the end in itself. I want you to underline this. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. Maximum. What does that mean, to be of maximum service? Again, willing to go to any length, right? Maximum service to God. And how do I fit myself to be a service to God? How do I fit myself? If I am serving God, I want you to, I put parentheses around the word serve. Service, right? Are you serving the ego that you've been serving for so many years and didn't even know? Are you serving something else, a higher power? When I serve a higher power and I serve God, the ego doesn't want me to, because now I'm serving something else and not the ego. And when I serve something else like God and not the ego just goes into the shadows. That's why we got to just keep watching out, looking out for that. Again, step 7, when it comes up, I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character. Remove from me that ego that stands in my way of my usefulness to you, God, right? We've got to fit ourselves to be of maximum service, not just to God. It says, and it's 2. So I'm not only going to serve God, but I'm going to serve people. And we're still only talking about it in step 8. I'm going to stop right there for step 8, because the next line says, it is seldom wise to approach. Now it's getting into a more approach, and I want to save the rest of it for step 9. I'm going to read all of this next week. I'm going to break it all down, and you're going to have a whole new another experience with it all. And I will stop next week on page 80. I will end it with the promises next week. Okay, so I'm going to end it right there. That's where step 8, that's where I'm going to stop step 8, and a beautiful place to real purpose is to fit ourselves to be a maximum service to God and the people about us. You know what? When I am making myself to be a service to God and the people about us, I am acting like that good Samaritan every day. Like we've been asking, like I asked you all to do last week, to act and see how that goes. When I'm doing that, I am being a maximum service to God and the people around me. Again, I hope I presented everything where everybody's having a new experience. I like to I don't like to have myself as a spotlight on the video. I like to be able to look at the other videos and see what everybody else is doing. Uh, I personally am probably going to listen to this again and take a few notes myself. I feel like when I'm doing these workshops, I'm moved. I don't know how to explain it, but I'm moved from in here. You know, I'm moved to have a new experience. I just don't believe that I can't stay sober on an experience that I had last year. Can continue having new experiences, new experiences. Please, when you go to meetings, please share your experience of going through this process. It's a beautiful thing. Not a lot of people are at meetings and sharing their current experience. What is your current experience? Share that in the meetings. Man, that enthused me hearing people with their, I'm like, oh, you know what? I want what he has. Do you want what we have? And are you willing to go to any length to get it? At some of these, we thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we could not. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start of this process. The process continues into the next step. Again, take those questions in the meditation I gave to you. Look over your list. You got a week to look over that list and make sure it's complete. I want you to say a prayer for each person as you're taking their name and putting them on a 3x5 card. I want you to say that prayer for each one. Are you willing? Put a plus or a minus on the card. If you're stuck at any of this, message me. I have no problem helping somebody with any of this. Now, I don't know if you don't have these type of cards available, you know, be creative. Tell me what you come up with. Be creative. You know, this is probably the size. It's a little bit smaller than my cell phone. You know, it's got lines on one side, blank on the other. I just go to like Office Supply, and they have tons of them there. I don't know. Most of these are yellow. I almost always get white ones. It's just how they are. Um, Again, you got a week to set up the cards. Say a prayer for each name as you're taking it off the list from step 4, and you're taking that information and you're putting it on the cards. Say a prayer as you're doing that. Do all that in meditation. Again, if you get stuck at any point throughout the week, anybody gets stuck, message me. Again, every day, I'm out there and I'm exposing myself. Every morning I post my morning meditation. I'm exposing it. You all can read it. I'm encouraging you all. Come and join us, man. We're living a spiritual life. There's prayers in every step. We got to change. We got to live a spiritual life. I'm showing you how to create it. Come join us. Join us. You know, I'm going to tell you what, when I'm having a bad day and I go into that morning meditation and I start reading, it's hard not to it's hard to keep having a bad day when you're reading all that stuff. It's so inspiring, you know. We have the nightly review. I get people into the stuff in the beginning. That's why it's already there. From day one, I'm working with people. I get them into prayer meditation, get them in a nightly review. We got to start develop a spiritual life. It's the only solution is a spiritual solution. My sponsor told me that I can do anything when in the beginning that begins with a 1. That means 10, 11, and 12. And I said, well, how can I do 12? And he said, you could buy somebody a big book. You can take them to a meeting. There's lots of things you could do for people, you know? Be a service. Be a service. Again, use that 7-step prayer every day, every moment. Use it when you start to become aware of a defect. Hey, God, remove this from me, right? The ego doesn't have a chance when I'm saying prayer. The ego's just like, no, I don't want you doing that, right? Because I'm serving something else. I always want you to understand the ego needs me to serve it, to do its actions, right? And if I'm serving something else, the ego can't use me. But as long as I'm serving God, I'm good. The moment I start to backtrack, and I start to serve self, ego's right there. In 1 second, ego's right there. Remember me. Don't forget that. Always stay looking out. Again, defects pop up. Continue to use 7-step prayer. Continue every single day. I want to say one more thing, and that's an apology. I want to go back there for a second. I remember I used to apologize to my ex-wife all the time. Now, it could be anything stupid, but I remember just apologizing. I never cheated on her, so it wasn't like that. But it was apology for something I needed, whatever. And I remember she said to me, "Your words don't mean nothing. Your words don't mean nothing because you're gonna be apologizing for the same thing next week, you know." And I remember thinking, she goes, "Your words don't mean shit," and it just, whoa, it hurt me. You know, this is my wife, someone I love, said something like that. My words don't mean nothing. You got to make your actions speak louder than your words. And that's exactly what I did. I got sober. My actions speak louder than my words. You know, again, I want to thank everyone for being here and being a part of this. I hope everyone's, thank you for allowing me to be of service. I forgot to start this with a set aside prayer, but I'd like to end it with a moment of silence for the still sick and suffering alcoholic. And we'll follow that with the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.